Join us now for Education Matters, a weekly look at the real people and real stories in education across North Carolina.
Welcome to Education Matters, presented by the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I'm Keith Poston. The term fake news was declared the official Collins Dictionary word of the year for 2017. It has also become one of President Trump's favorite put-downs. With technology and social media becoming nearly a ubiquitous part of our children's lives, we talked to two researchers about what parents and educators need to know to help students navigate this new media landscape. Also on this week's show, we'll introduce you to North Carolina's new Poet Laureate, Jackie Shelton Green. Before we tackle our main topic, we open with Headlines, a quick scan of education headlines across North Carolina and the U.S. The North Carolina School Boards Association, along with 20 different school boards, filed a complaint in Superior Court this week against more than a dozen state officials. The long-standing case involves the state's failure to comply with a 2008 court order to pay nearly $750 million to public schools. Now, according to the state Supreme Court, the state constitution clearly says that public schools are entitled to civil penalties collected by state agencies. The courts determined that between 1996 and 2005, hundreds of millions of dollars that should have been paid to local school districts for technology were diverted to other purposes. So far, in 10 years, only $18 million of the nearly $750 million has been paid back. The School Boards Association said that on behalf of students all over the state, they are willing and eager to find a mutually beneficial resolution. Last week, State Superintendent Mark Johnson announced a reorganization of the Department of Public Instruction. DPI now has 4 deputy superintendents instead of just 1. One of the new deputy superintendents is Dr. Eric Hall, who will serve as Deputy Superintendent of Innovation. Eric Hall was hired last year to lead the new innovative school district and will now oversee 6 divisions within DPI, including charter schools, federal programs, and curriculum and instruction. Finally, more drama with the UNC Board of Governors, this time over the search for a new chancellor of Western Carolina. Wilmington lobbyist and former Raleigh Mayor Tom Fetzer was accused by several board members of inappropriately engaging in the search process by launching a background check on one of the candidates. A campus search committee had spent months reviewing candidates, and President Spellings had recommended one of them be hired. That candidate has now withdrawn, and the Board of Governors said they are reviewing the overall hiring process. Remember, you can visit the Public School Forum's website at ncforum.org, click on Education Matters, and read more about each of the headlines as well as other topics we cover each week. As I said at the top of the show, today we're going to talk about fake news, social media, and what we need to know about our children's online habits. And joining us to talk about it are 2 professors and researchers from NC State University. We have Dr. Adria Shipp Dunbar. Dr. Dunbar is an assistant professor in the College of Education, and next to her is Dr. Megan Manfra. She is an associate professor, also College of Education at NC State. So thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
All right, fake news. We can't get away from hearing that term on the real news or whatever the real news is, right? So I want to start with you, Megan. Sort of tell me a little bit about sort of this sort of cultural phenomenon that we sort of now has become this term fake news.
Yeah, in many ways, fake news has become the headline. So as you mentioned, it was the word of the year in 2017, really because of the impact it had in the 2016 presidential election. So since that time, we've been really trying to figure out, the impact not only on that election, but in general on our political and civic life. And I think part of why it's so significant today is just the way it's been industrialized. So we see so much of it being produced like never before. It has a real partisan edge, and also it can spread so rapidly. When
you say industrialized, what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, people are producing fake news on their websites to generate ad revenue. And so one of the big things that happened after the election, a lot of the big tech companies like Google and Facebook have returned to their policies to try to think about ways to limit the money people can make off of fake news.
Right. Now, Adria, I want to talk to you about one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about on the show was this is a show about education and teenagers particularly, but really children starting at a very young age are online almost all the time. Sort of what, I think a lot of the focus of your research, not just about fake news and also learning, but what you call digital health.
Yeah. So the work that I do focusing on adolescents is, they are not only trying to be online at all times, but with things like one-to-one initiatives in schools and social media, online is reaching adolescents pretty constantly. So what is digital health? We've talked about health for years, and kind of going along with that is this idea of digital citizenship and critical thinking and how we act and kind of our moral and ethical behaviors online. So it's all interconnected. But
right. And we just pulled up on the screen, by the way, we've got a chart that's showing sort of how much teens are online. So we talk about the difference, between, really just in the last 5 years, how much of a difference is in terms of being on almost constantly.
Right.
Yeah. And being accessible constantly, right? And so what does that mean for what we're teaching kids in schools? Or what does that mean about what we're teaching kids at home, their parents? And what are we modeling for kids with technology?
Yeah, so when you talk about, we're talking about teaching them, we started talking about fake news. I'm hearing a couple of different things. One is, I think, being a better consumer or understanding sort of, how to critically think about what you see, but also just the overall usage, maybe screen time, maybe that's what the term the parents think. Where does that come in? How do you balance those things, Megan?
Right, so we talk a lot about media literacy, which I think you were referencing there when you talk about the actual skills that students need to develop when they're online. For instance, to go visit the About Us page, to understand who's produced the site. But then also I think what Adria is referring to as well is that we can't shirk our responsibilities as educators to teach students how to go through or use social media. So sometimes schools will ban social media and things like that, but in that way we're really kind of giving up our responsibility to help them become good citizens and use that.
Right. I mean, it's funny you mentioned about banning social media, and I know there's some that have blocked certain stuff, but I mean, it almost now seems kind of, I mean, it's rapidly changed. I mean, I've got a teenager, but just in a few years, she was from middle school to high school. The idea of you can't bring any devices to school, to now like bring your own device because almost everything we're going to do. I mean, that's changed, right?
Yeah, and I mean, with social media, I mean, I don't even know that kids are thinking about it as social media the way that we think about it. It's their Facebook, it's their Instagram, it's their Finstagram, it's their Fakebook, it's their, but they all have them, but they don't think about it like
I found out about Finstagram a couple of years ago. If viewers don't know that, a lot of times maybe your child lets you follow their Instagram, but they may have another one that you don't know about.
Yeah, and what's interesting is some adolescents are talking about that as a means for digital health, because their Instagram is one that, we've talked about popularity, and that's the one that's out there for all the likes and all the comments and the pictures, but that's overwhelming to teenagers, to adolescents. So in some ways, their Finsta is not necessarily always to be underground with their parents, but that's their smaller circle. That's how they can kind of limit the back and forth and the pings and the notifications that they're getting all the time, and to sort out what matters and what doesn't matter.
Yeah, we're just showing on screen right now the most used platforms. It's funny, we talk about Twitter all the time, again we talk about President Trump, but that's actually among teens is actually the lowest used. YouTube, huge. Instagram, huge. Those are really the big ones, right?
Right, yeah, and if these are sources for information, it's kind of interesting to think about who's producing them and how they're being produced and what kind of messages teens are receiving.
All right, so I guess first of all, let's get to, so what's the problem what do we need to be aware of, and then what are some potential solutions for parents and teachers?
Well, I think that from a social studies perspective, I think bringing this into the classroom is important. So we need to support teachers. Sometimes they're afraid to bring in these issues. They're controversial. We know when we talk to social studies teachers, for example, they were wary of teaching about the election in the first place. But it is a good opportunity to model really healthy sort of civic discourse, and then to also teach some of these civic online reasoning strategies, like laterally reading on the websites, seeking out contradictory information and things.
And from a digital health perspective, what do you think about?
I think reflection. We set a lot of rules with technology, both in schools and in homes, and that's helpful to some degree, but I think adolescents and students of all ages really need to be thinking and self-reflecting on how they're using these sites and how they are thinking about what they're reading, what that means to them. So instead of just having kind of the law of the land, I think we need to really push them to reflect on that comment that they made, or a comment that was made on their page, or something that they read online, and having deeper conversations.
Mm-hmm. Does it, is there a connection with digital and things like anxiety, stress?
Oh yeah, anxiety, stress, depression. We know that they're all on the rise. Suicidal ideation, that FOMO, fear of missing out. Yeah. It's real, and especially for this next generation who's come up with where technology has always been a part of their lives. It's having a huge impact on their mental health.
Last word from you.
Well, I just think that one of the important strategies here is to address it, to acknowledge it. I don't think that we've really dug in with students and let them know that we understand what they're going through and that we want to work with them.
And I guess, and probably try to model some good behavior ourselves. I'm going to try to work on that too. So,
good luck.
Look, thank you so much for being here. Interesting topics.
We'll
have some links on our website for viewers who want to learn more about your work, and also some great resources from Pew Research. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
When we come back, you're going to meet North Carolina's Poet Laureate. But before we go to break, see if you can answer this question. True or false, lower income teens are more likely to gravitate toward Facebook than those from higher income households. Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer true? According to the Pew Research Center, teens tend to use similar platforms regardless of their demographic characteristics, except when it comes to Facebook. 7 in 10 teens living in households earning less than $30,000 a year say they use Facebook, compared with only 36% of those whose annual family income is $75,000 or more. Did you know that North Carolina has a Poet Laureate? I already learned something from Jackie a minute ago. I was mispronouncing a Poet Laureate. The first one was appointed in 1948, and our most recent one, Jackie Shelton Green, is joining us here today. So congratulations on this high honor bestowed upon you by the governor of North Carolina.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Well, now when I looked up to see what about the history of Poet Laureates, and I did notice that it used to be a lifetime appointment. So. You didn't get that, but you still got the, I think Governor Hunt changed it to a 2-year appointment. So tell us, I guess, first of all, what is the role of a state Poet Laureate?
The role of the Poet Laureate basically is to be an ambassador for literature and literacy across the state. So in my role, I will travel across the state, interacting with libraries and public school systems and universities and many community centers and community-based organizations, encouraging and expanding literature and the literary arts.
And now you were, in the announcement, you're already one of the state's sort of most acclaimed poets. You've been writing and celebrated. You're in the North Carolina Literary Hall of Fame. You got the North Carolina Award for Literature. How did you grew up? We were just talking, but we're both native North Carolinians. Yes. You're from Eflin, Orange County?
Yes, I grew up in rural Northern Orange County, and I was welcomed into a wonderful family of educators. So literacy and literature were always available to me as a child. And as a child who was pretty precocious and really obsessed with nature and being alone, poetry was the vehicle for me. Poetry was my world, and I saw poetry, heard poetry, felt poetry in everything in my environment.
And so it sounds like that you said you were born into a family of educators, so obviously your parents, grandparents, that was a big part of it. I assume you must have had some teachers who encouraged you along the way too.
Yes, I also grew up during segregation, so reading, writing, literacy was very, very valued. There was never a question of, will you go to college? The question was always, where will you go to college? So given that, my grandmother's grandmother, the story of her life really encouraged me and is a framework that I stand on in terms of being able to be in a position to tell the stories and help people to understand that our poetry really is deeply embedded in story, and to help North Carolinians dig out, excavate their own stories is what matters to me.
Well, speaking of that own story, you are also the first African-American
Yes.
poet laureate. How important, well, I guess first of all, how important is that to you, but also just how in terms of the Black experience in America, in North Carolina, is literature and writing and literacy? I mean, I think about, you know, our history, you know, tragic history of slavery and things. The idea of that was one of the things that you always think about is it was a crime to teach a slave to write and read, right? So
exactly.
So it's powerful.
It's very powerful, and I know that I stand broadly on the shoulders of those ancestors who made many sacrifices. But more importantly, I would like to think that I'm a reflection, that when young children, not only children of color, but that when all children look at me, I like to demystify this mystique that the artist, the writer, the dancer, the poet is something that they can't attain. So I encourage young children when I'm working with them to call themselves writers. It's very important. And yes, it's important as a woman of color, as an African-American woman in the South, the third woman appointed North Carolina Poet Laureate, to be able to have these platforms, these social platforms, where especially young Black children see me and understand that I am them in this role.
I really like what you just said about calling yourself a writer, because I think a lot of times, you're right, that things like the arts, dance, music, people think, well, you have a gift. Yeah. I mean, we all have gifts, right? But I think what your point would be is that all children can become accomplished writers.
That's right.
Can be poets, because we have it within us.
Yes, naming is powerful, and I don't want them to think that this is only a gift. It's about being headstrong to stick to what you know, to identify with what you know in your stories, and to tell those stories, the power of utterance, and to give permissions to so many disenfranchised writers across the state, and so many writers who have thousands of poems waiting to just burst forth. And I feel like that's my role, is to help them bring these new stories, these new voices to the platform. I'm 65 years old, and I'm not going to live forever. And I would like to think that there are young people like me who want to write. And
so you're going to get a chance. This will be a cool platform for you to go. So you're going to go visit some schools. Some teachers may bring you in. You'll be able to talk to students. I mean, how does that work? How is that going to go?
Well, right now I'm scheduled to be, oh my God. So in addition to teaching documentary poetry.
That's right, I should have been, you also, you teach over at Duke University too. In addition, the Poet Laureate is not your full-time paying gig.
No, it's not. But in addition to doing that, I will be working with public school systems and private school systems. They're on my calendar. Libraries, there'll be many conferences where I'll be conducting workshops, facilitating workshops. And in doing so, I also work with public school teachers. And one of the things I want to give a pitch for is Poetry Out Loud, which is a wonderful platform, a national platform for advancing the study of the craft of poetry.
Poetry Out Loud.
Poetry Out Loud.
Okay, we'll share that on our website so people can find it. So last, I guess just as in conclusion, what would be the things that influence you, advice you would give to parents and teachers about this?
To remember that poetry really does nurture emotional resiliency, and it promotes community. And what's been very powerful for me is to witness how children build community through the making of poetry, through the making of poetics, and how their stories matter, and how they find out when they tell themselves stories and they tell each other stories that they do cross boundaries. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what the arts really should be, that incredible bridge that bridges humanity, my humanity to your humanity. So we celebrate our humanness, and we celebrate all the stories that make us who we are as a unified North Carolina citizenry.
Thank you so much for joining us. Our viewers, look her up, Jackie Shelton Green. You are a North Carolina treasure. You already were, and we're honored to have you on the show today. Thanks so much. After the break, this week's Leadership Spotlight. Each week, Education Matters spotlights individuals demonstrating exceptional leadership in education in North Carolina based on nominations from you, our viewers. This week, we spotlight the Superintendent of Greene County, Patrick Miller.
Leadership Spotlight is brought to you by Participate, where we believe every student deserves equitable access to quality education.
Greene County Schools is a small, rural, low-wealth school district located in eastern North Carolina. We have just under 3,100 students. We are able to do a lot of things here with very little resources. We are one of the more advanced districts when it comes to technology. We partnered with Apple, garnered this community support, county commissioners, local government. Some folks say we were on the cutting edge in 2003. I think that technology foundation allowed us to get ahead. Dr. Houston asked me and Greene County Schools to join in a grant attempt that provided some serious hardcore professional development in science for our teachers in grades K through 8, and I credit that initiative along with a blended STEM pilot that we did with North Carolina Virtual Public Schools for laying the foundation for what was to become our STEM program. So we got a digital showcase grant this past year that allowed us to ramp up some homegrown professional development, and then we applied for the DLI Innovation Academy grant, and they gave 4 out, and we were one of the 4. The Successful Practices Network partnered with the American Association for School Administrators, along with Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, to identify 25 districts in the country that they called Innovative Best Practices districts, and Greene was one of those. We're really proud of being recognized as innovative. You know, not necessarily high performing, but innovative in what we do to try to get our kids up to that level. We had 2 schools, Greene Central High School and Greene County Middle School, that were identified as being in the bottom 5% of the state, and today those schools are STEM model schools of distinction.
If you know someone that deserves to be recognized, please visit our website, ncforum.org, click on Education Matters, and you'll find a link to nominate someone in your community. After the break, this week's final word. Before 2016, the term fake news was reserved for phony news stories created intentionally to deceive readers into believing they were real. They were pushed out, often using real-sounding news organization names like the Denver Guardian or the Political Insider. By election year 2016, however, purveyors of fake news have become much more sophisticated and targeted than the comical grocery store checkout line tabloid headlines we've been seeing for years. So much so that the Pew Research organization found that nearly 1 in 4 Americans visited a fake news site in the month leading up to the 2016 presidential election. 1 in 4. Besides the proliferation of fake news, we've also seen the growth of online bullying, as well as recruiting efforts by hate groups that prey on society's most disaffected and vulnerable youth. Now, in the Pew Research Center survey of teenagers we discussed earlier, even though nearly all of them said they use social media extensively, about 1/4 said they thought the impact of social media on their peer group was mostly negative. Now, I personally love technology, and I believe advances have made us more informed and our lives more efficient. It's also connected us with friends, family, and people in places around the globe unimaginable 20 years ago. But there are downsides too. The challenge now will be figuring out how to harness this power for good. That's it for this week's show. Thanks for watching, and make sure you tune in next week for a new Education Matters.